WWE has existed for a long time, and with that means they have had many wrestlers come through their doors. And pro wrestling is not a normal industry. You get egos, you get characters, and sometimes that doesn't fare well in a backstage environment, and many WWE wrestlers of the past became notorious for their backstage antics and essentially being hated backstage. Whether that's by other wrestlers of the WWE or by the WWE creative team or officials, like and subscribe right now, as today we're going to talk about WWE wrestlers who were hated backstage. Sable would make her debut with the WWF in 1996. She had no prior wrestling experience, but her real-life husband at the time, Mark Mero, had just started working for the Federation as well, and she would immediately jump into storylines and angles with him and became his manager. She would stay as manager until he suffered an injury in February 1997, and she would become a solo act who wasn't really wrestling or anything, but rather just appearing in segments, and became very over with the fans on her own. And when Mark Mero returned in September 1997, a storyline would begin between the two where there was tension growing because Mark Mero was jealous of the spotlight that Sable was getting. This is where we'd see Sable start wrestling for the first time, and safe to say her ring work was less than stellar, but the WWF were still intent on pushing her and were building her up to look strong. She turned on Mark Mero, and after feuding with him would set her sights on the women's title, and in November 1998 at Survivor Series, Sable would defeat Jacqueline to win the belt. Sable would have a 176-day title reign with the belt, which was a pretty long run for the time, and Sable, despite not being the best worker, was being pushed as the top woman, and this was rubbing off badly backstage. Sable was unpopular backstage due to what I just mentioned, that she wasn't the best worker in the company or the division, and had no prior wrestling experience and training, but was being pushed near the top, which I guess other wrestlers backstage just didn't agree with, and it was perceived that she lacked dedication to wrestling. She would drop the belt in May of 1999 and disappear from TV abruptly, as supposedly she was in some sort of dispute with the company. And the next month it would all be revealed when Sable quit the WWE and filed a $110 million lawsuit against them with allegations of sexual harassment and unsafe working conditions. And if you ever saw a segment in the WWF with Sable and Vince McMahon, then this isn't very surprising. The suit came to a settlement out of court in August, and that seemed to be the end of that. But very surprisingly, Sable would actually return to the WWE, as she came back in 2003 and was even wrestling again. It was a surprising move to see her come back 4 years later after everything that had transpired, and this was a short run though, as it only lasted about a year and a half, as she departed the company in August 2004 in order to spend more time with her family, and this time herself and the WWE had departed each other on good terms. Before even entering the world of wrestling, Matt Riddle was an MMA fighter who had multiple fights in the UFC and a fairly successful run in the UFC. Well, sort of. Let me explain. He first appeared on The Ultimate Fighter in 2008, which, to explain to a fan in wrestling terms, is essentially the UFC version of Tough Enough. He went 1-1 on The Ultimate Fighter and was given a UFC contract despite not winning the series, and he would then fight 12 times in the UFC up until 2013 with a fight record of 9-3. But not really. His record is actually 7-3, due to 2 of those fights being changed to no contest after he tested positive for marijuana in post-fight drug tests for both of those fights, with the second positive test in February 2013 leading to his release from his UFC contract. He would have one more MMA fight for Titan Fighting Championships, winning that fight and ending his MMA career at 8 wins and 3 losses. And 8 months after his last fight, it was reported that Matt Riddle was training to be a professional wrestler, and he would make his debut in February 2015 for the Monster Factory. That same year, he also won the Monster Factory World title, as well as signing for Evolve and participating in a WWE tryout. The next year in 2016, he entered Pro Wrestling Guerrillas Battle of Los Angeles tournament but was eliminated in the first round. Matt Riddle would spend years as one of the top indie wrestling names and would wrestle for promotions all around the world until finally in July of 2018 it was reported that Matt Riddle had signed with the WWE, and sure enough he would appear in the crowd at NXT TakeOver Brooklyn in August 2018. And Matt Riddle would enjoy a solid run in NXT. He would be a main event to upper mid-card guy and would be a part of big matches like in War Games and being on Team NXT at Survivor Series 2019. But Matt Riddle never had won a singles title in NXT. In fact, his NXT run is probably most known for his tag team run with Pete Dunne, where they were known as the Broserweights. The Broserweights entered and won the Dusty Rhodes Tag Team Classic in 2020, which earned them a shot for the NXT tag titles, which they won at NXT TakeOver Portland 2020 in February. However, shortly after winning the titles, COVID would strike and Pete Dunne would not be able to travel to NXT. Matt Riddle would defend the titles alongside Timothy Thatcher as the substitute partner, but they would lose the titles on the May 13th, 2020 NXT to Imperium when Timothy Thatcher walked out on Matt Riddle. This would result in a fight pit match 2 weeks later, which Thatcher won and was Riddle's last NXT match as he was called up to the main roster to the SmackDown brand in the summer of 2020. He quickly got into a feud with AJ Styles for the IC title but would fail to beat him and then would feud with Baron Corbin. And the summer of 2020 would also see Matt Riddle embroiled in controversy outside of the ring as accusations were made against Matt Riddle during the Speaking Out movement. A woman accused Riddle of choking her out and forcing oral sex on her, which Riddle would immediately deny in a video on social media, and also posted a statement from his attorney to social media to accompany it. He had stated that he had an affair with the woman, but everything was consensual, and Riddle would also file a restraining order against her alleging stalking and harassment, but he withdrew the restraining order just months later. The accuser would file a lawsuit in October 2020 against Riddle, the WWE, and Evolve president Gabe Sapolsky. WWE and Gabe were both dismissed as defendants in March 2021, and then the entire suit was dropped altogether in July, and everyone sort of just forgot about it all. Matt Riddle would continue to wrestle actively in the WWE whilst all this was going on, and despite the controversy, was finding more success in the company. He was drafted to Raw in October of 2020 and his ring name was renamed to simply just Riddle, and months later he would win the US title at the 2021 Elimination Chamber, his first singles title win, which would end up being a short-lived title reign, and he would drop the title to Sheamus at WrestleMania. And shortly after losing the title, Riddle would begin a storyline with Randy Orton, with Riddle wanting to team with Orton but Randy not being interested. However, after beating Orton in a match, he would agree and RK Bro were formed. At SummerSlam that year, RK Bro would win the Raw Tag Team titles from AJ Styles and Omos and begin actively defending and appearing with the titles on TV. RK Bro were a big hit in the company and would hold the titles for 142 days before losing them to the Alpha Academy in January, but they would win the titles back in March. They would defend them at WrestleMania that year and then would enter into a feud with the Bloodline, more specifically the Usos, and they were looking to unify the tag titles. This unification match would sure enough happen on the May 20th, 2022 edition of SmackDown, with the Usos coming out on top and ending Matt Riddle and Randy Orton's reign at 74 days this time. Randy Orton would be sidelined with a long-term injury not too long after, and Matt Riddle would be left to his own devices once again and would have to compete as a single star once again. Riddle would continue his feud with the Bloodline and even get a world title shot against Roman, which he of course lost. Riddle would then feud with Rollins during the summer, losing to him at Clash at the Castle but beating him inside the fight pit at Extreme Rules, and on the December 13th, 2022 episode of Raw, Matt Riddle was written off TV after he was attacked by Solo Sikoa, and the reason for him being written off TV was because it was reported that Matt Riddle had been suspended for 60 days due to taking drugs. And a 6-day suspension means this is a second offense, which suggests somewhere along the line Riddle was suspended and it wasn't publicly announced. Along with this, Riddle would be sent to rehab and he would post to Twitter in light of the news stating, "I've been working a lot on myself lately and have been saying no and setting boundaries for the first time ever, and certain people aren't happy about it, but I couldn't be healthier or happier. Thank you for all the support." and he would also update fans with photos whilst he was away. He would return in April of 2023 and resume his feud with the Bloodline as himself, Sami Zayn, and Kevin Owens would face the Bloodline minus Roman at Backlash in a losing effort. Riddle would also start to feud with his ex-NXT rival Gunther for his IC title, but would be beat at Money in the Bank in a surprisingly short match. And following this, Matt Riddle would really start treading water in the company, and his appearances were becoming more sporadic and he was appearing on TV less, and eventually on September 22nd, he announced he was no longer with the company and had been let go. And this was probably due to controversy Riddle had found himself in not too long before this. On the 11th of September 2022, in a quickly deleted Instagram post, Riddle claimed he was sexually assaulted by TSA at JFK Airport in New York, sparking an investigation. However, 2 weeks later and a week after Matt Riddle's WWE departure, a video obtained by TMZ showed Matt Riddle at JFK Airport with TSA and disproved the claims, as well as showing Matt Riddle making a loud scene with a drink in hand. Since leaving the WWE, Matt Riddle has expressed interest in an MMA return and influencer boxing, and has also been booked for various indie shows, so it seems he is continuing his wrestling career, at least for now. Matt Riddle's early downfall will mean he will always remain a big what-if question in regards to his career and how far he could have gone had his demons not got in the way. Bill DeMott made his first major wrestling appearances for WCW. He enjoyed a stint in WCW from 1995 all the way until WWE's buyout of the company in 2001, being a two-time WCW United States Heavyweight Champion. He would then wrestle for the WWE from 2001 until 2007, mainly being used as a jobber and a lower card guy, where he would go under many different names: Hugh Morris, General Huge Erection, and of course what we mainly know him as, Bill DeMott. Bill DeMott left the WWE in 2007 and would begin working the indies and would open his own wrestling school that he ran from 2009 until 2010. And it seemed like being a trainer was Bill DeMott's calling now, because in 2011 he returned to the WWE as a trainer, thus ending his in-ring career. He was the head trainer for that year's Tough Enough, and he would become the head trainer for FCW, a position that he would retain when FCW transitioned into NXT, and he would continue in this role into 2013 when the WWE Performance Center was opened. But in 2015, his career as a trainer would also end, because in March 2015, a load of allegations against Bill DeMott came to the limelight from several former Deep South Wrestling, FCW, and NXT trainees. These allegations had actually all came out between 2012 and 2015, with WWE only responding to some of them at the time and stating they found no wrongdoing. Among the names accusing Bill DeMott of mistreatment were Eve Elise, Hannibal, Kurt Hawkins, Luchasaurus, EC3, Ryan Nemeth, Simon Dean, and even Kenny Omega, amongst other names. DeMott was accused of sexual harassment, using racist and homophobic slurs, letting trainees train while naked, making trainees do dangerous drills, and bullying his trainees. This resulted in the hashtag FireBillDeMott trending on Twitter, and sure enough, on March 6, 2015, Bill DeMott would respond to the allegations. He outright denied all the allegations, but also announced his resignation, citing that he didn't want to damage the reputation of WWE. Since his resignation, he has not been involved in wrestling. Chadler was born on June 6, 1982, and would go on to serve for the US Army in Iraq. He would make his professional wrestling debut in the year 2000 under the name of Shatter, with that name then being adjusted to Phil Shatter. He would spend the next decade working across the indie scene, mainly wrestling for NWA Anarchy and other promotions across Georgia and the Carolinas. He won the NWA Anarchy Heavyweight Championship as well as the NWA National Championship, the latter of which he held for 2 years and is the all-time longest reigning champion. He made an appearance on a Ring of Honor pay-per-view in 2010, and also in 2010 would begin sporadically appearing in TNA wrestling. He began using the name of Gunner and would appear alongside Murphy, playing the roles of TNA security guards and occasional wrestlers, and Hogan must have saw something in these guys, because they would start appearing on TV a lot, and they would join the Immortal stable, which at the time was the biggest thing in TNA. At February 2011's Against All Odds pay-per-view, Gunner would wrestle his first TNA pay-per-view match, a 6-man tag, himself, Murphy and Rob Terry against James Storm, Robert Roode and Scott Steiner, which sounds like the most one-sided match of all time. Gunner and his team would of course lose the match, and is there a single person who would have wanted otherwise? Gunner was signed to a full-time TNA contract in 2011, and from here we would go on to see this guy every single week on TV, and he would go from being a security guard into a member of the active roster, and like I said, he was on TV every single week. On the March 17, 2011 edition of TNA Impact, Gunner would defeat Murphy and Rob Terry in a 3-way match to win the vacant TNA Television Championship, in a move that really came out of nowhere and was probably only done to get more gold within the Immortal group. He defended the title against Daniels once before losing it to Eric Young in May of 2010 in a 15-second match, and the TV title was truly dead by that point. He would stick around in TNA for a few more years, mainly as a mid-card member of Immortal, but when Immortal ended, and more specifically when Hulk Hogan was gone from the company entirely, there wasn't really much else for Gunner to do in TNA. He had a 4-month tag title reign with James Storm in 2013, but that's about the last notable thing that Gunner did in TNA following the split of Immortal, and before he would officially finish up with the company in June of 2015 and depart from TNA Wrestling. He would return to the independent scene before in 2017 he was signed by the WWE. It was reported on May 29, 2017 that Chad Lale had signed a developmental deal for the WWE, and the very next month he was working the NXT house show circuit under his real name of Chad Lale. And he would continue exclusively on the house show scene for quite a while. He would actually wrestle on the house show scene all the way until August of 2018. He signed for WWE in May 2017, but August of 2018 is when he finally got his first NXT TV appearance. And by that point though, Lale had a whole new identity in the WWE. He was now called Jackson Riker, and he'd begun appearing alongside Wesley Blake and Steve Cutler on house shows, calling themselves the Forgotten Sons. The Forgotten Sons would begin appearing as a trio in NXT when they made their debut as a trio in September of 2018. And yeah, they were just an awkward fit in NXT to say the least. NXT, of course, already at the time had a top heel stable in the Undisputed Era, and that made it very hard for the Forgotten Sons to stand out and break out from the crowd in NXT. Jackson Riker acted as the muscle of the group, whereas Steve and Blake were the ones mainly wrestling as a tag team, and Jackson Riker was portrayed as being a fairly strong character in the WWE at first. He would only wrestle singles matches occasionally, and while the Forgotten Sons as a duo or a trio would often be on the losing side of matches, Jackson Riker all the way until 2019 had never been pinned or submitted in singles competition. But that would be broken and shattered by Tyler Breeze in June of 2019, who beat him in a 3-minute match. And then from there, himself and the Forgotten Sons were very rarely on the winning side when they did wrestle on TV. They were pretty much a certified jobber trio in NXT. And even so, they were hardly ever wrestling on TV. On the April 10th, 2020 edition of WWE SmackDown though, the Forgotten Sons would make their main roster debut, probably because they didn't know what to do with them in NXT. And hey, the Forgotten Sons actually debuted very strong. They first defeated the Lucha House Party, and then they defeated the tag champions, The New Day, leading to them challenging for the titles in a 4-way tag match at Money in the Bank that year, where they were unsuccessful. So far, so good though. A good start to life on the main roster for the Forgotten Sons, and they've already done more than they ever did in NXT. But that good start for the Forgotten Sons would actually be the end of the Forgotten Sons. That match at Money in the Bank was Steve Cutler and Wesley Blake's final ever WWE match, and it was all because of a single tweet. On June 2nd, 2020, Jackson Riker tweeted the following: "Thankful for the President of the United States we have. God bless America. Built of freedom, forgotten no more." And this was obviously tweeted during a very heated political climate, obviously during the pandemic and the height of the Black Lives Matter movement, two things I'm not going to talk about because I dread to read the comments. And this tweet got Jackson Riker a lot of heat from the rest of the WWE locker room, with other wrestlers in the WWE publicly responding to him on Twitter. Mustafa Ali responded saying, "I'm thankful you posted this because I'm now aware of what you stand for. When black brothers and sisters are crying, you praise someone that refuses to acknowledge acknowledge their hurt. Kevin Owens responded to him saying, "The freedom you speak of entitles you to speak your mind all you want. I'm not here to argue that. I just really need to tell you that I think you pushing your shitty wrestling catchphrase as all of this is happening is absolutely fucking pathetic. Good night." There was responses from Batista, Sami Zayn, Ricochet, as well as numerous others, and safe to say, Jackson Ryker was in a lot of shit, and as a result, the Forgotten Sons were taken off of WWE television. And while Steve Cutler and Wesley Blake were eventually released in February 2021, Jackson Ryker would remain in the company, and would begin appearing on Raw in December 2020, aligned with Elias. It was a very random alliance, was never really explained why it was happening, and of course, it never went anywhere. Elias turned on Ryker in May of 2021, thus turning Jackson Ryker face for the first time in his WWE stint. A very bold move by the WWE given all the controversy he'd been surrounding in, and also just a very random move in general. Jackson Ryker, or Gunner, or whatever he worked as, was never usually a babyface. The feud between Jackson Ryker and Elias would finish following Ryker defeating Elias in a strap match, and then in a Symphony of Destruction match. And then after this, Jackson Ryker became a mainstay of main event. Meaning yes, that entire Elias feud and program was a complete and colossal waste of time. His final match on Raw took place on the 27th of September 2021, losing to Karrion Kross in just a couple of minutes, and his final WWE appearance was on a main event episode in November before he was released from the company that same month on the 18th. Since being released, Jackson Ryker returns to the independent scene, but would only be wrestling occasionally after his return. In fact, according to Cage Match, he has only wrestled 5 matches since his 2021 November release. Only 5 matches in a year and a half. As well as this, it's also been announced by Jackson Ryker himself that this will be his last year in professional wrestling. He recently announced that he will be wrestling his retirement match and his final match in professional wrestling this year in August in his home state of South Carolina. The story of the way Enzo Amore got signed to the WWE is probably the most Enzo Amore story I've ever heard. Enzo and Triple H had shared the same trainer in New Jersey, and when that trainer showed Triple H a video of Enzo cutting a promo whilst doing exercises, that was apparently all it took for him to be given a tryout, which would result him in signing a developmental contract with the WWE and reporting to NXT. He originally went under the ring name of Eric Anthony, but that quickly would be changed to what we would come to know him as for the rest of his time in the WWE, which was of course Enzo Amore. He debuted on the May 22nd, 2013 episode of NXT, debuting as a heel and playing what was described as a cocky Jersey Shore loudmouth, being squashed by Mason Ryan. Stevie Ray, Earthquake, Alundra Blaze. A few weeks later though, Enzo Amore would pair himself with Colin Cassidy, a man who would come to be known as Big Cass. The two would turn face and begin pursuit of the NXT Tag Team Championships. They were mainly just a mid-card team, but the team would have to break up for a while due to Enzo getting injured in training in November 2013. According to Simon Gotch, Enzo Amore's sworn arch-nemesis from critically acclaimed videos Simon Gotch Shoots on Enzo Amore, he broke his leg doing a wrist lock and blamed it on the mat being too loose. Enzo returned in April 2014, reuniting with Cass and feuding with Sylvester Lefort. They had a hair versus hair match at WWE NXT TakeOver Fatal 4-Way. What an awesome show that was, by the way, underrated show, which he won, probably his biggest win in his WWE career to that date. Soon after this, Carmella would debut with the WWE in NXT, and she would join up with Enzo and Cass, and this was probably the prime of Enzo's career in NXT. These three got mega over, and this was a synonymous trio in NXT, and them getting over as much as they did can mainly be attributed to Enzo Amore's mic skills, and of course, his intro that he would do for all of them during their entrance. My name is Enzo Amore, and I am a certified G and a bona fide stud, and you can't teach that. And this right here, this is Big Cass, and he's 7 foot tall, and you can't teach that. Bada boom, realest guys in the room, how you doing? And there was also that one bit where he goes, and this right here, this is the subscribe button, and you should hit that. 2015 would be the year that Enzo, Cass, and Carmella became stars in NXT. They had numerous tag title shots, and it was their feud with Dash Wilder and Scott Dawson, aka the Mechanics, aka the Revival, aka FTR, that saw them at their most over in NXT. They challenged FTR for the tag titles at Roadblock 2016 unsuccessfully, but with how over they were, WrestleMania being near, and the fact they didn't win, a main roster call-up was surely imminent. And that is exactly what would happen, as on the Raw after WrestleMania 32 in 2016, Enzo and Cass debuted on the main roster. And yes, they debuted without Carmella, but they debuted to an insane pop and reaction from the crowd, legit deafening reaction. They cut an awesome promo on the Dudley Boys, and they entered the tag title #1 contenders tournament, and they made it to the finals where they faced the Vaudevillains, but this would only be another setback. This match took place on Payback 2016, and the match had to end early after Enzo got legit concussed. His sworn arch nemesis and star of critically acclaimed videos Simon Gotch shoots on Enzo Amore, Simon Gotch, threw him under the bottom rope, and his head bounced off the rope before bouncing off the mat, concussing him. And following Enzo's return from injury, they kind of got lost in the shuffle in the tag division. Well, I guess saying lost in the shuffle is a bit unfair, but they kind of lost that new debuting tag team bounce that they had, that huge overwhelming popularity and overness. I mean, there was still popularity, they were still over, but that momentum was gone, and WWE didn't seemingly want to bring it back in any way. They were involved in some high level programs, such as when they teamed with John Cena against the Club at Battleground 2016, or when they faced Jericho at SummerSlam, and they were in the 4-way Raw tag title match at Mania 33, which I was there to watch. It was not a bad spot to be in whatsoever. They were on TV every week, getting pay-per-view matches, but they weren't winning the title, and they should have been the top tag team. But WWE had other plans, and Enzo and Cass would break up in 2017 after Cass attacked Enzo backstage. There was that whole mystery attacker angle. It was a bit of a dumb turn. Don't really know why they did it. But it was this next year in Enzo's career where he went solo for the first time in WWE, and this next year was just so hectic. He switched over to the Cruiserweight division and would very quickly win the Cruiserweight title, and this was just such a really weird time, because Enzo winning the Cruiserweight title, it was a Vince decision, very obviously, and was done to try help get more eyeballs on 205 Live. But whilst he was champion, Enzo had tremendous backstage heat. He had been kicked out of the locker room after punching a bully, in Enzo's words. He wasn't friends with Cass apparently at the time, they fell out, and the word was that what you saw with Enzo on screen was exactly how he was backstage. He'd bring in outsiders into the locker room, which apparently got him heat, and all in all was just seen as too big for his boots. And yeah, it was just weird because Enzo Amore, while he was champion, he was still almost getting punished on TV, like that one time when The Miz just randomly buried him on the mic, or when Braun Strowman, who had nothing to do with the Cruiserweight division, just came out during a Cruiserweight segment during a commercial and attacked him. Like, what was the point? And I'ma just say it because Enzo's title reign with the Cruiserweight title got a lot of hate, but this was a good title reign, and yes, Neville losing the title was very questionable, and at what cost, because he left the company very soon after he lost the title. But Enzo, to me, was a burst of life that 205 needed, and it was pretty much dead once both him and Neville were gone from it. Enzo Amore was set to defend the title against Cedric Alexander at the Royal Rumble, but on January 22nd, 2018, he was suspended from the company. It was confirmed the same day by Phoenix PD that Enzo had been under investigation since October 2017 for alleged sexual assault, and the next day, Enzo Amore's suspension was turned into a firing, as he was fired from the WWE and the Cruiserweight title was vacated. WWE fired him due to his failure to inform them of the investigation being ongoing, but he claims that he didn't know he was under investigation either until it was made public. On May 16, 2018, the Phoenix Police Department ceased their investigation due to insufficient evidence. But Enzo was already out the company at this point. And I think it's fair to say that since being fired from the WWE, Enzo has definitely made the most of his time. Let's just talk about some of the things he's done since he left the WWE. He released some music under the name Real One. It was absolutely awful. He got into a fight with Joey Janela at a Blink-182 concert, and he very infamously snuck into Survivor Series 2018 in a disguise, sat on a floor seat on hard cam, and midway through one of the matches, got up on his chair and started doing his catchphrases before security dragged him out. Absolute craziness. Enzo still wrestles to this day. Him and Cass even reconciled, and they teamed up for a bit on the indie scenes after they were both out of the WWE. They were even meant to join Ring of Honor. Oh god, remember that? Austin Aries began his pro wrestling training in the year 2000 and would make his debut that same year in November. He would start wrestling for various indie promotions, but his first somewhat breakout would come in 2004 when he made his debut for Ring of Honor on April 24th. And by the end of 2004, he was the Ring of Honor World Champion, having beaten Samoa Joe for the belt. He'd hold the title for about 6 months before losing it to CM Punk, and he would continue to grow his career, as in 2005, he would make the next step up and debut for TNA. He debuted at Sacrifice 05 as a pole option to face Christopher Daniels, and he would win the pole, but not win the match. However, his performance was enough to impress TNA officials that they signed him to a contract, and Aries was now signed to both TNA and Ring of Honor and a regular member on both rosters. He would continue to find success in both companies, as in TNA he formed a stable with Alex Shelley and Roderick Strong, who he was already teaming with on Ring of Honor alongside Jack Evans. Aries and Strong would win the Ring of Honor tag titles in December 2005, and things were looking good. But 3 months later, the first signs of Austin Aries' attitude problems began to show. As in February 2006, Austin Aries as well as Roderick Strong was suspended from TNA for arriving 4 hours late to the Against All Odds pay-per-view. And this happened because Aries and Strong had just been in Long Island for a Ring of Honor show, and TNA officials had requested them to drive down to Tampa for Against All Odds a little earlier than originally planned, as there was a snowstorm, but Aries and Strong decided not to travel early despite the advice and stay for longer, thus causing them to be late. Something that was very clearly avoidable. And when he would return to TNA, it was under the new name and gimmick of Austin Starr, and he would join up with the X Division, where you'll most likely remember him from Paparazzi Productions. 2007 would be an eventful year for him, as on April 18th, Austin Starr was suspended from TNA for 90 days. This was due to TNA requesting him to film vignettes on what he saw as his day off, and though he did ultimately agree to do them, TNA weren't happy with his attitude again, and thus he was suspended. And then 2 weeks later, it was announced that Ring of Honor had signed a new pay-per-view deal, and with that, TNA pulled Austin Aries from all Ring of Honor shows. However, also during this suspension, Austin Starr would request his release from TNA, it was granted, and he returned back to Ring of Honor in June. And he'd spend the next 3 years in Ring of Honor, where he was once again a top star for them, and he would win the world title once again. He left Ring of Honor in 2010 to join Dragon Gate, as he had a short run that only lasted 8 months, as he left to pursue a career outside of wrestling, as he was considering retiring. But this decision would be reversed, as he was offered to return to TNA, and he took that offer. He returned back under the name of Austin Aries again in June of 2011, joining back up with the X Division, and by September, he was the X Division champion. And Austin Aries would have an all-timer X Division title reign here. In fact, it's the longest TNA X Division title reign in TNA history, as he held it for 301 days, holding the belt until July of 2012 with a great catalogue of matches and title defenses. And in fact, he would never even lose the belt, as instead, the Option C rule was introduced. Austin Aries was not satisfied with being just the X Division champion, so the Option C rule was introduced by Hulk Hogan, which allowed the X Division champion to relinquish the belt to challenge for the world title. And thus, Austin Aries would vacate the belt belt and challenge Bobby Roode for the world title at Destination X, and he would win the world title. In just over a year since returning, Austin Aries had become one of TNA's top guys. He'd hold the title for 98 days. It was a shorter but still sweet reign, as he lost the belt to Jeff Hardy at Bound for Glory. His next title reign would be a tag title reign alongside Bobby Roode, as they won the titles in January 2013, holding them for a couple of months. And one time while they were making their entrance, Austin Aries would get himself into trouble, as during their entrance, ring announcer Christy Hemme messed up the announcement, leading Austin Aries to charge to the ring, corner Christy Hemme, and get on the middle rope to taunt. It's not a good image, and Christy Hemme was unhappy and uncomfortable with what took place. TNA fined Austin Aries, and Aries apologized to Hemme, which she was said to be satisfied with. And other than that, it doesn't seem as though Aries found himself in much other trouble in this TNA run, and he would exit TNA in 2015 after 5 X Division title reigns, a tag title reign, and a world title reign. He had done everything there was to do, and the only next step was to go to the WWE. He would sign to the WWE in January 2016 and go to NXT. He would have a decent run in NXT and was even set to reunite with Roderick Strong in the Dusty Cup, but he had to withdraw due to injury, and this injury would end his NXT run altogether. As during his injury, he'd start doing commentary on the main roster for 205 Live and Cruiserweight division segments, and in March 2017, he would return to the ring and turn face by attacking Cruiserweight champion Neville. He would challenge Neville for the title numerous times, first at WrestleMania 33 in an underrated match where he came short, and he challenged again at Payback but won by DQ, and then he challenged again at Extreme Rules in a submission match but was tapped out, and then shortly after this, out of nowhere, it was found out that Austin Aries had been released. It was shocking to hear this news given he was just in a 3-month title program, but lo and behold, his attitude came back to bite him, as apparently Austin Aries was not popular backstage, including amongst WWE officials, and thus Aries was let go. Austin Aries' attitude had got him in trouble before with suspensions and fines, but never a firing. Until now. And of course, Aries would return to the Indies and back to TNA again, as he returned in 2018 alongside all the belts he had won upon his Indies return, dubbing himself the Belt Collector. And he would expand his collection by quickly winning both the TNA World and Grand Championships, as Austin Aries was back to life in TNA again, and during his time as World Champ, he would feud with Johnny Impact. They would have a match set for Bound for Glory 2018, and in the lead up to the match, Aries and Impact would exchange words on Twitter, which had fans questioning if they were worked or not, where Johnny Impact was making fun of Aries' height, and Aries didn't seem to be reacting well. One very interesting and infamous tweet from Aries read, the form of discrimination that's still super cool. Short shaming. If I joked race, retards, your gay look, if I fat shamed your husky wife, instant outrage. But you can predictably cutter me over my height, genetics I don't control, and it's just funny. This tweet supposedly didn't go down well with TNA, and it also came out later that Austin Aries and Johnny Impact hadn't agreed with TNA to have an online feud leading up to the match, and these tweets of course got quite the reaction from the fans. But at Bound for Glory itself, in the match, Johnny would defeat Aries before Austin Aries would completely just get up and no-sell the finish, just straight up walking away before flipping off the fans and TNA officials. What just happened? This was Aries' last appearance for TNA, and to this day, nobody knows what really happened here, and it's always been assumed that Austin Aries did this on his own accord, but there are various reports that say this happened due to Aries being concussed, and Aries was apparently at the next TNA tapings but was sent home, and then Aries has also said before himself that this no-sell was planned and he was meant to return to TNA, so nobody really knows. It's confusing all round, but alas, Aries hasn't returned to TNA and hasn't really done much at all in wrestling since. In 2020, various allegations were made against Austin Aries by numerous alleged victims accusing him of various forms of predatory behavior, including a woman who claims that while at a show, she was made to bend down and kiss Austin Aries' testicles. Aries would release a long statement in response where essentially says he isn't perfect, but he's not a predator, and that the Austin Aries character isn't representative of who he is as a person. But after this, Austin Aries' career was all but dead. Nowadays, he works for low-level indies, and the only two promotions you might recognize that he's worked for somewhat recently are NWA and Control Your Narrative, which is just so predictable, right? He was only in the NWA for a short period of time from 2021 to 2022. He was there for a few months, part of a tournament, which made it to the finals of but lost. And he was also on a few of the Control Your Narrative shows, a company which died a quick death as it was probably the worst wrestling promotion of all time. And since then, like I said, it's been pretty much nothing from Austin Aries, and it's safe to say his wrestling career is pretty dead in the water. Austin Aries in his prime was an elite level in-ring worker, brilliant on the mic, and could have a good match with just about anyone, but this really goes to show that no matter how good you are at your job, you're just not going to go very far if you're a dick. But hey, Austin Aries did go quite far, but it was never going to last if he kept up his attitude problems, and seemingly he did just that, and behold, it didn't last. Loki would make his wrestling debut in 1998 and would start wrestling around his regional indie promotions in New Jersey, New York, and surrounding territories. He'd start to rise through the indie scene fairly quick though, even making some jobber appearances for the then WWF in the year 2000, and then in 2001, he was involved in All Pro Wrestling's King of the Indies tournament, where he finished runner-up, losing in the finals to none other than American Dragon. Then the next year in 2002, was the year that Ring of Honor was founded, and Loki was an original member of the roster as he was part of the first ever Ring of Honor show in February 2002, winning in the main event against Bryan Danielson and Christopher Daniels, and then 4 months later in July at the Crowning a Champion show, he would win and become the first ever Ring of Honor champion in the main event as he bested Daniels, Doug Williams, and Spanky. He'd defend the title successfully the next month against AJ Styles, but then lost it to Xavier in September. During this time, Loki had also been working for TNA as he was working their first ever shows as well, and was part of the Triple X faction alongside Christopher Daniels and Elix Skipper. And they would have a couple of reigns with the NWA tag titles, and then in 2004, the Rob Fiennes, the incident took place. Can't say the full name of it because but after this happened, TNA and Ring of Honor ended their roster share agreement, and talent who wrestled on both were forced to pick one to work for. Loki chose TNA, but months later would depart anyway to go back to Ring of Honor. In the 6 years he'd been wrestling, Loki had quickly established himself as one of the top names outside of the WWE. He'd wrestled for all of the biggest companies outside of WWE such as Ring of Honor, TNA, and had even worked for various Japanese promotions, with his appearances for New Japan beginning in 2004, which was the start of a long and tenuous career with them. He'd depart Ring of Honor in 2006 to go back to TNA once again, and would start using the ring name of Senshi, and Senshi would be a big name in the X Division, winning the X Division title 3 times during this stint in TNA. However, out of nowhere in 2008, Senshi would depart from TNA as he would win the pink slip in the Feast or Fired match at No Surrender 2007, which in kayfabe meant that he was fired, but the firing and release actually came for real the very next day at the TNA tapings, where Dixie Carter announced to the roster that anyone who was currently unhappy could get their release on the spot right then and there, with Loki being the only person to take Dixie up on on this offer, as he was released from TNA in that very moment. Loki was apparently unhappy with his booking, which was a common theme for his career. You see, Loki of course had always been working the indies in the background through all the times in Ring of Honor, TNA, New Japan, etc., and he had gained a bit of a reputation for himself by basically being a wrestling promoter's worst nightmare, and in the process had burnt a lot of bridges. The aura of Loki is best described from this Reddit post I found asking why he's burnt so many bridges, which said, "From everything I've read and watched about Key, here's what I've gathered. He doesn't have an off switch. He's always on, always kayfabe, and is always pissed about his gimmick, how he's booked, who he loses to, how he loses, etc. Basically, a booker's nightmare." Essentially, in other words, Loki had gained a reputation as being a mark for himself, and that can kinda be reinforced by the way he left TNA and various stories of him refusing to lose to other wrestlers, with one of the most notable cases of that being when he refused to lose to Claudio Castagnoli in PWG, which got a reaction of pure bewilderment and heat on Loki himself. In 2009 though, despite this all, Loki was signed to the WWE, and this was his big break. He'd start out in FCW and was called up to the main roster in 2010 to be part of the second season of NXT, back when it was a weird game show. He was given the ring name of Caval and would be paired up with his pros, which would happen to be Michelle McCool and Layla, aka Lay Cool, which had to have been a rib, but I gotta say, I thought they were an entertaining dynamic. Just the sheer silliness of Lay Cool and how annoying they were, and the pure just menace and straight-faced stone coldness of Caval just combined so well. And Caval would ultimately go on to win the second season of NXT, which in kayfabe won him a WWE contract, and he would move over to the SmackDown brand. And life on SmackDown was not fun at all for Caval, as he was essentially kinda buried and made to be a jobber for the first couple of months. The story goes that WWE management were told to bury him until there was a decision to book him in an IC title program against Dolph Ziggler for that year's Survivor Series, which he would of course lose, and then he was straight back to being buried again, which would lead Caval to asking Creative if they had heat with him, which they said no, and then he asked them if they had future plans for him, which they said no, and he later then asked for his release, and they would say yes, and Caval would officially depart from the WWE on December 23rd, 2010. It was a less than stellar WWE run, and WWE truly did go out of their way to bury Caval for pretty much this entire SmackDown run. I won't deny that he was definitely being wasted in WWE, but the fact he left so quick into his run is once again just a common Loki-ism. Loki would of course return back to the independent circuit and back to Japan. He'd established himself as a top name in New Japan, winning the IWGP Junior Heavyweight title, but back on the American indie scene, Loki was right back to finding himself as the center of conversation every time he wrestled, and there just always seemed to be incidents involving Loki, such as the time when he knocked out his opponent in his Evolve debut in 2012. Loki would retire at the end of 2013 after burning the bridge with All Japan Pro Wrestling by accusing them of not covering his medical issues like originally agreed to, and like I said, he retired because of this, but obviously this is Loki. He returned just a few weeks later to wrestling. He made his third TNA return in 2014 by joining the Beatdown Clan, but this was a short run and he was out in less than a year. And in more recent years he had yet another fourth TNA return, which was also very short-lived obviously, as well as some appearances for MLW, but by this point in his career, Loki's reputation had preceded him, and most promoters just simply didn't want to deal with him anymore. Loki actually still wrestles to this day, where he only occasionally works for low-level indies and will probably never reach the heights he did before. Loki got big in an era of indie wrestling where he wasn't really much different from a lot of the other indie guys in their personality and attitude, but the big difference was Loki was a very captivating and unique in-ring worker, and that ultimately made it worthwhile for wrestling promoters to book him, because yeah, he was a head case, but he's also gonna have the best match on the show and shift some tickets. But now in 2024, Loki is 44 years old, far past his prime, and it is no longer really worth it to book Low-Ki. Low-Ki goes down with a similar story to Austin Aries, a guy who could have been at the top of wrestling for a long time, but he was just too much of a mark for himself and didn't make doing business with him easy at all. When he made it to the WWE, he definitely did have the odds stacked against him and was for sure set up, but he obviously didn't help himself or do himself any favors in any way, and people clearly weren't fans of his backstage as a result. It's the same thing I said in my Austin Aries video, man. You can be a great wrestler, a great talker, put on the best matches every night, but if you're a dick and nobody wants to work with you, then you're simply just not gonna get far. Regardless though, Low-Ki remains one of the more interesting cases of wrestlers who just treat wrestling a bit too real, and just has so many infamous stories and moments from across his career, which is something that can't be said for a lot of wrestlers outside of major companies. Like, I mean, just go on YouTube and search for any shoot interview about Low-Ki. I guarantee you, your favorite wrestler has a story about Low-Ki. WWE audiences were first introduced to Ryan Reeves when he was a part of the $1 Million Tough Enough in 2004, and though he did not win the season of Tough Enough and did not win the show, he would still end up getting signed to the WWE, who clearly saw something in him and signed him to a developmental contract, and he would report to Deep South Wrestling. Ryan would train with Deep South Wrestling for a couple of years before OVW became the new WWE developmental, and his ring name was changed to Ryback. However, FCW would become the new developmental a couple years later, and Ryback would be repackaged as Skip Sheffield, and after a bit of time in FCW, would be brought onto WWE TV to be a part of the first season of NXT in February 2010. Back when it was that really weird reality competition show. Skip Sheffield's pro was William Regal as he set out to win a WWE contract. However, Skip sort of failed to make any sort of impact on NXT. He was eliminated on week 12 as the third elimination of the show, finishing with just a 2-5 win-loss record and finishing 6th out of 8th. But despite not winning the show, Skip would still get his main roster opportunity, as on the June 7th, 2010 episode of Raw, Skip Sheffield along with all the other NXT contestants would attack John Cena, CM Punk, the announcers, and wreck ringside as the Nexus had just arrived in the WWE in one of the most infamous segments and moments in WWE history, and a huge moment for the time. The Nexus would continue feuding with John Cena, and this was a big spot for Skip Sheffield to be in. I mean, the Nexus were being presented as the top heel stable and were all involved in the main event angles of every single show they were on. It was a really good spot to be on for his first TV spot, but we all know what happened to the Nexus. We all know. They went to SummerSlam that year to take on a team of the WWE roster in a 7v7 match. People like John Cena, Edge, Chris Jericho, The Great Khali, Bret Hart. You know, all the stars. And of course, they lost this match, as well as all of their credibility, which was just completely squandered after being built up for 3 months for no reason. That same month, Skip Sheffield would also get injured and would have to go through 3 surgeries in his ankle, leaving him out of action for a year and a half, and he was effectively kicked out of the Nexus. In April 2012, Skip would make his return, but he would make his return as Ryback, and he would go on a run of squashing folks. When I say a run of squashing folks, I mean it was damn near 6 months of Ryback nearly every single show, just destroying and squashing 1, 2, or even sometimes 3 wrestlers in a matter of minutes and saying, "Feed me more." And even if there was a subsection of fans chanting Goldberg at him, Ryback was getting over, and this repackaging was a really good thing for him. And come October 2012, CM Punk needed a new challenger, and the only active and built up enough wrestler to challenge him at the time was Ryback, who, when he was revealed as Punk's next challenger for Hell in a Cell, would become the most over he's ever been in the company. There were fans who wanted to see him beat CM Punk. In fact, I'd go as far to say that a good majority of people wanted to see him beat CM Punk. However, who didn't want to see him beat CM Punk was of course the WWE themselves, who were not intent on having Ryback win the title from Punk, because of course they wanted The Rock to do that. WWE had booked themselves into the corner. Ryback was so over, but they didn't want Punk to lose. So what did they do? Well, they had referee Brad Maddox attack Ryback to help CM Punk get the win at Hell in a Cell, in a horrible finish and a dreadful swerve. Ryback's momentum hadn't gone just yet though, and he would challenge for the title again, this time in a three-way match also involving John Cena at Survivor Series. This match would end with Punk winning via interference again, but this time though from The Shield, who were making their debut, and this would kick off a feud between Ryback and The Shield, with Ryback teaming up with Team Hell No to face The Shield in a TLC match at TLC, and Ryback's team did lose, but this match was awesome. He would enter the Royal Rumble match for the first time in 2012, entering last at number 30, and got 5 eliminations before being eliminated by John Cena in the final 2. And this is where Ryback would really start to stall in the WWE, as every big match that Ryback was in, he was usually on the losing end of. At WrestleMania 29, in his first WrestleMania, he would have a match with Mark Henry, which he lost, and now all the momentum that had been built up had officially just been destroyed. Ryback would turn heel the next night for the first time as Ryback, and despite losing to Mark Henry, would get to challenge John Cena for the title at the next 2 pay-per-views at Extreme Rules and Payback, but he was unsuccessful in both. And after this, he would kind of just coast around for the rest of 2013, with the WWE seemingly just not knowing what to do with Ryback, and he did all sorts of things. He was a Paul Heyman guy at one point along with Curtis Axel. Remember Rybaxel? The greatest tag team ever. He also got to work with CM Punk again at Hell in a Cell, losing of course, in an angle that Punk revealed he hated doing, as he hated working with Ryback, and during this feud would make Ryback call himself an idiot backstage after he botched a table spot and hurt Punk. Ouch. And 2014 was also much of the same, with Ryback being relegated to being a jobber tag wrestler with Curtis Axel, a major fall off from 2012. In August of 2014, he would undergo hernia surgery, leaving him out of action for a couple of months, but when he returned, he would get a good spot when he returned, and he would return as a babyface with his Feed Me More gimmick once again, and he was added as part of Team WWE to face Team Authority at Survivor Series, a really big spot to be in. And of course, at the show, Team WWE would win the match with help from Sting, and Ryback would resume life as a singles wrestler, no more Rybaxel. And Ryback kind of found himself in a spot where he would wrestle on pay-per-views and get regular TV time and good spots to be in and good spots on cards, but he was usually on the losing end when it came down to it in the big matches. But at Elimination Chamber 2015, that would finally come to an end when Ryback won his first title, winning the Intercontinental Championship Chamber match in what was an awful match, by the way, to win his first title. It was a great moment for him. He would defend the title successfully against Big Show and The Miz at that year's SummerSlam, but would lose it to Kevin Owens at Night of Champions, ending his reign at 112 days in a pretty average title reign. And following this, Ryback would begin treading water again and needed something new. And something new is what he would get when in February 2016, he would abandon the singlet and would sport trunks and turn heel again. He had gone full Goldberg mode officially. He'd challenged Kalisto for the US title at Mania 32 in a losing effort, and then again at Payback also in a losing effort in what would be his final appearance with the WWE, as on May 2nd, he was sent home from TV tapings due to a contract dispute. And the next day, he'd post to his blog that this was due to lack of equal pay and creative frustrations from his end. And 3 months later, Ryback's release was finally finalized, and he was gone from the WWE just like that. So overall, Ryback's run in the WWE wasn't that bad. He definitely underachieved for how over he was at one point, however overall it wasn't a bad run. But what caused Ryback to really fall off and become a joke is his activity post WWE, particularly on Twitter, where on his page you'll find posts like, "Vince McMahon, like most promoters, has an insatiable urge to have control. He had no control watching his mum get beat up as a child, which is a horrendous thing for a kid to witness as their whore mum tries to make ends meet. Vince has failed to evolve. fuck you, old man. A just completely unhinged tweet, and one that is even more unhinged when you realize that this tweet came not too long after Vince's mother had passed away. And as well as this, on Ryback's Twitter you have tweets from him wishing death on Vince, making derogatory comments towards current WWE talent, and of course the infamous tweet asking fans where they want to see him return, where the option to retire was clearly the winner, a tweet that he kept reposting, and retire kept on winning. This poll is now synonymous with Ryback's career and all he is really known for in wrestling today, a poll telling him to retire. That is tough. Ryback has not wrestled since 2018 and there's no chance he'll ever return to the WWE due to his comments about the McMahons and his lack of goodwill with the fans that he has of course lost. Ryback's drop off in the last decade has quite been something, from being one of wrestling's top guys to being a joke who nobody wants to sign. But then again, has anybody introduced Ryback to Billy Corgan yet? Now that's a career opportunity for him. I can see it now. Ryback versus Tyrus for the NWA World Championship, with a whole viewership of 12 people.